a very imprisoned narcissist. Christopher, or Chris Watts, admitted to murdering his pregnant wife. He later admitted to killing his daughters by smothering them. He pleaded guilty on the 6th of November 2018 to multiple accounts of first-degree murder as part of a plea deal when the death penalty was removed from sentencing. He was sentenced to 5 life sentences without parole on November the 19th, 2018. Pursuant to request, this video has been created and is based on the original analysis that I conducted on the 7th of September 2018, following Watts being charged and prior to his plea deal conviction and sentencing. Therefore, you need to take into account the timing of the original analysis as you listen. Thank you. Originally, Watts claimed that his wife and 2 children had disappeared from their home. A family friend, Nicole Atkinson, reported them missing on Monday, August 13th, 2018, when Shannan Watts missed a doctor's appointment and she was not responding to calls and texts. Ms. Atkinson telephoned Chris Watts, asking where his wife was. Watts apparently stated that he did not know where his wife or his children were. Miss Atkinson assisted Watts in searching for the missing 3. She stated that Watts did not cry or seem overly concerned, and this caused her to believe that something was amiss. Watts made several television appearances a day after the disappearance of his wife and children, where he explained the apparent circumstances of how he learned that they had disappeared, and stated his wish for them to return. He stated that he and his wife had had an emotional conversation on the evening before his wife's disappearance. Friends and family of the Watts family expressed their understandable concerns about the well-being of the 3 who had disappeared. The fact that the Watts had a perfect family life, heavily documented through social media, something I shall return to, and their disbelief at how something like this could happen. Approximately 2 days before having made these appearances, Watts allegedly explained to the police that he had told his wife that he wished to separate from her, and she then strangled the 2 children. Watts stated he saw his wife strangling one of the children, Celeste, on a baby monitor. He stated his other daughter, Bella, was already blue and sprawled out on a bed. He stated, in a fit of rage, he then strangled his wife. Shannan Watts' body was found in a shallow grave near an oil tank. The bodies of the 2 children were found dumped in an oil tank. The location was where Watts worked until he was recently fired by his employer. A drone had detected a bedsheet which had a pattern which matched pillowcases and a top sheet found in the bin in the kitchen at the Watts' residence. This detection led to the discovery of the shallow grave and occurred prior to the apparent confession of Watts. Extensive coverage and speculation arose at the time as to what had happened in the Watts' home, and on the basis that Watts had killed all 3, what caused him to do so? What's the personality of this man? Watts' version of events. Watts has apparently admitted that he killed his wife in a fit of rage based on her strangling the children. Remember, this was prior to his guilty plea. Whilst this may seem unlikely, this is, at the time, was Watts' evidence. Operating on the basis that this was the case, this evidence is several interesting factors. To be enraged, having witnessed your children being strangled, is a potentially understandable response. One might, though, have expected Watts to have sought to help his children, to see if they could be saved. The failure to do so evidences a lack of empathy for their well-being, and also suggests that he did not attend to their well-being, because there was no point, because he knew he had killed them. Perhaps he did not attend to them because he knew they were dead and killed by their mother, so he felt it pointless. However, anybody with emotional empathy would more likely have tried to help the children, even if futile, their own emotional thinking overriding the logic of the situation, trying to save the individual. And therefore, Watts' response either demonstrates a lack of empathy assuming his wife killed the children, which we now know not to be the case, and the fact that we now know that he has killed them, that in itself demonstrates a lack of empathy. To strangle his wife evidences a lack of empathy. Watts suggested that he responded in an enraged way, and that would be indicative of the ignition of fury. Not because his wife had killed the children, but because his control had been threatened in some way. He had been wounded by his wife's behaviour. Watts stated that he and his wife had an emotional conversation when making his original television appearance on the night before her disappearance. He then stated to police he had wanted to separate, and this caused his wife to strangle the children. At the time, I explained that it was highly unlikely that Shannan Watts killed her children, and we now know that to be the case, that she did not. This was supported by the extensive material on Facebook, including videos, that evidenced a woman who clearly loved her children and showed considerable empathy towards them. Accordingly, someone such as her would not kill her children. Watts's response, whereby he did strangle his wife, was as a consequence of a lack of emotional empathy, and will have followed a threat to his control, resulting in the ignition of fury. Watts therefore demonstrated a lack of empathy, and the ignition of fury as a consequence of being wounded through his wife rejecting his control in some way. The homosexual affair and cheating. A man named Trent Bolt contacted a television station and claimed he had been in a 10-month intimate relationship with Watts. Bolt's claim contained details about Watts's life which suggests his claim of a relationship was of sound veracity. Bolt's details were also found on the Meet Me app, which was on Watts's phone. This app also demonstrated that Watts was active in contacting both men and women. By engaging in an affair with Bolt, this again reinforces Watts's lack of empathy towards his wife and family. It shows a sense of entitlement to do as he wishes with whomever he chooses. The contact with both men and women on this app underlines this lack of empathy, as it suggests that he was repeatedly cheating on his wife, or at the very least looking to do so. Watts would also be drawing reactions from these individuals through their responses by way of fuel. Watts's bisexual behaviour shows sexual fluidity, a consequence of a lack of true self, and supports an ongoing quest for fuel, an unconscious driver in his behaviour, which meant that he would cheat on his wife and was unconcerned whether this fuel provision came from men or women. As long as he got it, it didn't matter. The relatively blatant behaviour on this app, it was easily found, and soon enough, showed Watts had no real concern about detection, demonstrating rather obvious behaviour, underlining his sense of entitlement and lack of accountability for his actions. Bolt stated that Watts had said to him that Watts was a victim of emotional and verbal abuse, and he was trapped in a loveless marriage, and he didn't know any way out. Does Bolt have any motivation to lie with regard to those statements? It's highly unlikely, and therefore one would accept them as legitimate. These comments are certainly at odds with the posting of a seemingly perfect life, which Shannan Watts posted on social media. Watts did not appear as a victim, nor did his marriage appear loveless, at least from Shannan's perspective. Such comments are evidence of the perpetual victim mentality of a narcissist, the issuing of lies, which the narcissist believes and frequently uses, alongside the projection and blame shifting, all instinctive manipulations. His narcissistic perspective caused him to believe that he was a victim of emotional and verbal abuse, thus justifying his behaviour. His narcissistic perspective caused him to believe that he was trapped in a loveless marriage and he didn't know any way out, and that when he made such statements at the time to Bolt, he was doing so to assert control over Bolt by smearing his wife and therefore seeking pity and sympathy from Bolt, which would provide both fuel and enable Watts to directly assert control over Bolt. Remember, a narcissist has to control everybody in the fuel matrix. Information also emerged that Watts had an affair with a co-worker. On the basis that was true, this demonstrates again a lack of empathy for his family, a sense of entitlement, a lack of boundaries, and a lack of accountability. The television appearances. The television appearances, as at the 7th of September 2018, provided considerable insight into Watts is. Even on his version of events, when he made a plea for the return of his family, he already knew they were dead. Thus Watts lied. He not only lied to family, friends and the police, but he took it a step further, and did so through several television appeals. This demonstrates a grandiosity in thinking he could get away with what had happened, that people would believe him, and shows a lack of sophistication with regard to his approach, supporting a low cognitive awareness and function, and a sense of entitlement. Watts' language is all about what he wants. I want them back in the house. I want to come back. I want them to come back. If they are not safe, that is what is tearing me apart. I need to see everybody. This evidences two matters: his sense of entitlement and also lack of empathy for, assuming they had disappeared, how his wife and children would be feeling. Watts talks with a flat effect for most of his appearances. There is no emotion. He is not upset. He is not agitated. He is not worried or concerned. This is because he lacks the ability to demonstrate those emotions, because he lacks empathy, and moreover, he does not even have the cognitive empathy, as he is unable to even feign the emotions and words that one would expect from a wounded husband and father. See the video, The Imitation Game. Watts' facial expression barely alters. There are no tears. His gaze is steady and unwavering towards the reporter. There is no break in his voice, and at one point he even gives a short laugh when talking. Once again, this demonstrates a clear absence of empathy and awareness. It might be suggested that some people laugh when they are nervous. This is true, but it is clear that Watts is not nervous, and his laugh is his arrogance appearing momentarily. Watts provides detail about how his wife had apparently killed the children. We know that now to be false. He is able to provide that detail because he killed the children, and he is able to transfer that description to his wife committing the killings. A lack of accountability. Watts is asked by one reporter about the prospect of Watts having the finger of suspicion pointed at him. Watts deflects this completely by talking about wanting the children and his wife back. This evidences the narcissistic defense mechanism of deflection, an automatic and a distinctive response to reject the challenge to Watts' control. It also shows his lack of accountability, since he does not see that he is culpable in any way. His narcissism tells him he's not at fault. It also evidences a haughtiness as he shoves the legitimate question to one side, not even giving it consideration or an answer. Facebook and social media. Shannan Watts' extensive use of Facebook provides considerable insight into the behaviour of Watts and the dynamic at work in the marriage. There are many pictures which show an apparently perfect family life. Naturally, many people use Facebook to show an unrepresentative, overly optimistic portrayal of their life. This is just as applicable to the Watts. It is clear that Shannan Watts adored her husband and her children, and she wanted to share that with the world. However, given what her husband is, it is also highly likely that Shannan focused on this portrayal to firstly please and appease her husband, and secondly to convince herself that her family life was good on the whole. It is highly likely that Shannan Watts knew about her husband's infidelities, and she was also subjected to devaluing behaviour from him, and not knowing who she was dealing with. She sought to mollify him by posting repeated praise for him. She described him as the best thing that has ever happened to me. She posted a video of one of her daughters saying, "My daddy is a hero." The pictures show a family unit, caring, secure, and happy. Shannan's behaviour fueled Watts' grandiose self. It was also done out of desperation to prove to him that she really did love him and adore him, as doubtless when devaluing her, he will have accused her of not loving him, of her being a cheat, and such like. Caught by her own emotional thinking as a victim of the narcissist, Shannan tried to convince herself that everything was all right, and if she kept up adoring Watts, loving him and doing the best she could, the problems that existed could be healed and fixed. It is evident in the pictures that Watts is dead behind the eyes. His smiles are fixed, but the eyes show nothing. Shannan confirmed that Watts sent her a friend request on Facebook, and she thought nothing would come of it. But then, 8 years later, they are married with 2 children. No doubt there was a dogged pursuit by Watts of Shannan, and social media is a keen hunting ground for many narcissists. Many of the posts pander to Watts' sense of grandiosity and inflated ego. There are videos of him working out, pictures of him without his shirt on, apparently tenderly massaging his wife. In the videos, the responses of Watts show either a flat effect or a delay in manifesting a supposedly emotional response, e.g., delight in a certain situation. This shows his stunted emotional spectrum and the fact that he does not instinctively feel emotions, but he has to emulate them. Although he is not particularly accomplished at this, hence the more usual flat effect that he demonstrates. A video on Watts' YouTube page from April 2012 shows him giving a presentation, where he states that there are 3 reasons to maintain a romantic relationship. He refers to having a desire to do so, a moral obligation to do so, or whether there is a necessity to maintain it. Love is not mentioned. This is telling because as a narcissist, he does not experience love, and this presentation revealed the clinical approach he has to a relationship. It is a transaction because he owns the other person, who he regards as an object and his possession, and the maintenance of the relationship is not seen as being based on empathy and love, but on what he believes is what he should do by applying cold criteria. The disposal of the bodies. As mentioned earlier, Shannan Watts was placed in a shallow grave, the children dumped in oil wells. The dumping of the bodies could only have been done by him, and evidences a lack of empathy once again. If he was enraged by his wife's alleged behaviour towards the children, one might understand his callous disposal of his wife in a shallow grave, but not dumping the children in an oil well. As it transpires, he murdered all 3, and therefore, dumping them all in the manner that he did is a very clear demonstration of his complete lack of empathy and low cognitive function. The performance. One might wonder why Watts confessed at the time as he did, and why he didn't maintain a facade that the family had disappeared and had been murdered by someone else. Why did he apparently confess to murdering his wife first of all? There are 3 points arising here. Watts hardly uses a facade at all. His television appearances were woeful. Many narcissists of a higher cognitive function would have turned in an Oscar-worthy portrayal of upset worry and concern. He did not, because he does not have the capability. But his low cognitive function, lack of awareness, and complete lack of accountability mean he carried out the television appearance unaware of how it looked. Watts has a low cognitive function, and his story that his wife killed the children first and he reacted with rage is in effect the best that he could come up with in an attempt to deflect blame. It lacked plausibility. Watts has no sense of accountability. He does not believe he has done anything wrong at all, not even murdering his wife. He is convinced that he has no culpability and that his story, weak as we know it was at the time, is his truth because his defense mechanism caused him to believe this. See also his recent court appearance. He is unmoved, unperturbed, and the flat effect evident once again. We of course now know that he admitted to killing his pregnant wife and his daughters. He pleaded guilty. Was this the manifestation of some form of regret, remorse, emotional empathy by pleading guilty? Not at all. He did that to assert control, because his control was threatened by the prospect of being found guilty and sentenced to death. He only admitted to the murder of all 3 to protect himself, protect his control, and to assert control against the others that his narcissism perceived as threatening that control. He asserted control by wanting the death sentence removed from his eventual sentencing, and therefore he only pleaded guilty to achieve that. In essence, he was looking after himself, i.e., his narcissism was ensuring that he remained in control. Yes, that meant that he was sentenced to 5 life sentences, But, in the mind of the narcissist, he was the one that asserted control because he got rid of the prospect of being executed. There is no remorse, no expression of regret, no guilt. He is incapable of all three. Watts allowed his wife to portray their life as perfect. He was not overly concerned by presenting a facade, but embraced it because, when it was done, as he posed in the pictures, etc., he asserted control over his family and gained fuel in the process. 2 of the prime aims. It also allowed him to acquire character traits and residual benefits, primarily from Shannan, the other aspects of the prime aims. His wife actually created the facade, not because she was a narcissist, but because she was trying to appease her controlling and unpleasant husband, to convince herself everything would work out, and was unaware of what her husband was, and is. Watts was hero-worshipped by her and well-fueled. But, in time, he tired of his wife's positive fuel through her love and affection. He doubtless devalued her, and that she was in the sustained devaluation period. She will have received verbal insults, unpleasant sexual behaviour, he will have controlled her movements with other people, possible physical assaults, but his wife will have kept this hidden, fearing further reprisal, and also because she was desperate to keep the family unit intact. She also will not have known what she was dealing with. Watts sought fuel elsewhere through infidelity. He did so because he has no empathy, he is entitled, and has no sense of obligation or accountability. It's likely that his wife had learned of these infidelities and she threatened to leave him. This threat to his main source of control and fuel, and the other aspects of the prime aims, meant that he was either given challenge fuel or was wounded, and his fury ignited, and with heated fury he reacted with violence, causing him to murder his wife and then his children. He saw the children as a manifestation of his wife the traitor, and they were similarly so regarded, and therefore became victims of his murderous ignited fury. He has a low threshold on his ignited fury, which meant he did not resort to a non-lethal manipulation, but lashed out in a fatal way, unable to control himself. His control was affected, and his narcissism caused him to respond in a way to assert that control, as a need to assert his perceived superiority, and an unconscious need to punish, and he did so in the most drastic method. I doubt that he actually wanted to separate from his wife. He had no need. She provided fuel, both positive and negative, was under control most of the time, maintained a picture-perfect existence, provided him with character traits that he could utilize, the facade occasionally being dipped into, and doubtless residual benefits, a well-ordered home, cooking, cleaning, sex, etc. Doubtless she catered to his every need on the domestic front, providing those residual benefits. He had no need to separate from this. However, his sense of entitlement allowed him to seek fuel intimately elsewhere, and still remain with his wife. He did not need to separate to continue to do that. He was having his cake and eating it. It is evident that Watts has no empathy, neither emotional or cognitive. He is of a low cognitive function. He requires fuel. He has a sense of entitlement, no sense of accountability, has elements of grandiosity, is manipulative, haughty, lies extensively, and has no boundary recognition. He is a narcissist and a psychopath, but a low-functioning one. His appearance, use of sex, unfaithful behaviour, and his going along with the perfect family appearance of attractive wife and children, nice home, holidays, friends, etc., shows him as a clear somatic narcissist. Chris Watts is a somatic, middle-lesser, narcissistic psychopath. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.